Okay. So welcome to the first AMSA event that has ever begun on time, first of all. Well, we're 2 minutes late, but nevertheless it's pretty good. Welcome all of you. This is our first proper talk of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Students Association. My name is Tahir Nasser. I was last year's president, and this year's president refuses to do the presentation. So he's sitting over there, his name is Talha actually. So I'm afraid I've had to give it. Completely impromptu, so please forgive if there are any inconsistencies and mess-ups on my part. Okay? First of all, a little bit about the Ahmadiyya Muslim Students Association, 2-3 minutes, before we get onto the topic of the Islamic banking, world economic crisis and its Islamic solutions. So first of all, what is the Ahmadiyya Muslim Students Association? The AMSA, for short, is the student branch of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, which claims to be the revival of the peaceful and true teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. The founder of the community, whose name was Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, lived in the late 19th century in India and founded the community in 1889. He died in 1908. He claimed to be the latter-day reformer which is promised within Islam. For the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, stated that Islam would undergo degeneration as all religions ultimately do, but that God's interest in Islam would be such that he would continue to raise reformers, and in the 14th century of the Islamic calendar would raise one who would be the equivalent of the Jesus for the Muslims, as Jesus the first was for the Jews. So that's a brief introduction. He penned over 80 books, many of them on all aspects of theology, and his second Khalifa, his second successor, wrote a huge amount of literature on the economic system of Islam in particular. The claim of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community is such that we claim that through our peaceful teachings, peace will truly be established within the world within a short amount of time, though it may not look like it at the moment. So, without further ado, onto the world economic crisis. Is extremely important for peace, as we all know, that economics plays a huge role, and we can see this in the world today in terms of the income inequalities that there are, especially in Britain, and how the collapse has affected the peace of mind, more importantly than almost anything else, of millions of people around the world. So peace cannot really be discussed independently of economics, and that's what we're here to discuss today. For your listening pleasure, I don't know, is that a word? Is that a phrase? We have three, I'm not going to say experts, but three people who have, know about this kind of stuff, I suppose. So the first speaker we have is Mr. Mansour Manan, who's sitting in the middle there, who will be giving the talk on an introduction to Islamic banking. Mr. Mansour Manan is the, let me get this right, he's the partner of Dark Capital. Not a partner. Not a partner. One of the most important people though. Yeah, that's fine, we'll leave it at that, that's fine. Of Dark Capital, which is, I believe, an Islamic bank. And he's studied this for a very long period of time. He's going to give a very excellent and thorough introduction to that topic. I've looked through the slides, so I know it's very good. Beside him on his left is Mr. Rohan Shaheen, who is from EME Capital, who is one of the partners of EME Capital, I believe. And he'll be talking on how Islamic economics can be applied to the modern day today, and to today's modern, as it were, economic models. And the final one is Mr. Sayyid Nasser, who's sitting on the far right, who's now a semi-retired finance lawyer, used to be a finance lawyer for Citibank, and was one of the first people to be investigating this topic of Islamic finance for Citibank in the 1980s. And he will be talking on the causes of the economic collapse from the Islamic perspective. So, with that introduction, I won't talk anymore, I'll just sit down. And I'd like to invite Mr. Mansour Manan to come up to the stage. And I'm also going to put the lights down. Is that all right? Can everybody see everything? You want to read? Okay, that's fine. Is that okay?
Yes, please. Some familiar faces here. Assalamu alaikum. For those who don't know what that means, it means peace and blessing of Allah be upon you. And Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, in the name of Allah, the Gracious, the Merciful. May the blessing of Allah be upon the Holy Prophet ﷺ and his family and companions. First of all, I want to thank the Ahmadiyya Muslim Association here to invite us for this important topic. But I think it is, when we talk about Islamic finance, we always tend to start off by saying that we don't have enough time to really explain the subject. It is a vast subject. And today, given only, I think, about 20 minutes to give you an introduction to Islamic finance, the time is in fact very short. So I will expect some questions afterward if people have not been able to understand what I've been trying to say, especially when I tend to speak very fast. Okay. What I will talk about, okay, very briefly, what is Islamic finance framework, the main principles of Islamic finance, and basic Islamic products. Generally, okay, when Islamic finance started off a number of years ago, I will say in the mid-60s, it had, it started actually in a very small village in Egypt and has not today grown into a global industry. And I think the latest estimate says that it is total assets under Islamic finance is about 1.5 trillion. So we can actually verify these figures. When the industry started, a lot of commentators said that the industry will just die very quickly because it was only a passing fad, it was only a fashion, and it will disappear. The reason that most of the commentators who actually made those comments were bankers who have been making huge amount of profits from Muslims, right, after the petrodollar surpluses were routed into the banks, because there were no Islamic banks in those days, in the 1960s, 70s. They made huge amount of profit because those money, those funds were being placed in those banks at zero rate of interest. And you can imagine how much money the banks actually made. So it was those commentators who were getting afraid that given Islamic finance, that money will disappear from them. And that's gradually what has been happening. Let me just read you one statement about what Islamic finance is about. Okay. This is from a book on Islamic law and finance by Frank Vogel and Samuel Hayes. They are professors at MIT in the US. They say one of the most striking facts about the rise of Islamic banking finance is that it represents an assertion of religious law in the area of commercial life, where secularism rules unquestioned through the rest of the world. Islamic finance challenges the presumption that most commercial modes are per se more efficient or otherwise superior, and it challenges the secular separation of commerce from consideration of religion and piety. And it goes on to say, to the believer, Islamic law is not merely an obligation of conscience, which if observed earns eternal rewards. The law is also the best guide to human welfare in this world. The believers, God legislates for the well-being in this world and the next. As a law instilled by God in man and nature, obedience to which leads to social and individual success and happiness. So it goes on to say further things about that. But basically, Islamic finance is based on the Islamic law in inverted commas. We talk about Sharia. Sharia literally means the way, or the way you live your life. And to understand Islamic banking, you need to have some of the concepts which are in Sharia. Sharia is divided into two factors. One is Ibadat, and the other is Muamalat. Ibadat is the way we pray, how we pray, when we pray, etc. Okay, and our communication to God. Muamalat is the laws that governs the political, economic, and social way we actually conduct our life. Okay, and when we talk about and most of Islamic finance, the Sharia that we use in Islamic finance is the Muamalat. Okay. Now, how do we actually apply Sharia? Sharia itself is the law. It is the law, the commandments which have been laid down in the Holy Quran and the Hadith. Fiqh is the interpretation of the law. Now, the law at anyone which has been, the law as has been revealed by God cannot be changed. It is eternal for all time. However, the interpretation of that can change over time and within and between communities. Okay, and that is fiqh. And what we have is fiqh muamalat, okay, which is the Islamic jurisprudence relating to the commercial life of a Muslim. Where we drive these Sharia, okay, and the fiqh relating to Islamic commerce. Obviously, the first source is Quran. The second is the Sunnah and the Hadith. Right? The Sunnah and Hadith, for those who are not aware of that, it is the sayings of the Holy Prophet and examples, and his example of how he implemented the commandments of God during his lifetime. Okay, and then there are secondary sources. As I said, the laws as set out by God cannot change, but the interpretation of the law can change, and that is because human beings are not perfect, and they will not be able to interpret the law perfectly at any one time. Okay? And the law then develops. And how the law develops in Islam is through a process of international ijtihad and tawfiq. Ijtihad is independent reasoning by scholars of how do you apply a particular law to a particular circumstance. Okay? And then you go through qiyas, which is deduction by analogy. And I think Salih will be able to explain much more of that because he's the legal expert in these things. And then if you have a consensus among all the scholars, it's called ijma. So after the Holy Quran and the Hadith, the next most important aspect of Islamic jurisprudence is the ijma, where scholars overall agree to, the implementation of a particular rule and regulation. So they should have taken another one. Okay. As I said, the Islamic law, right? The interpretation of Islamic law is not perfect, and it has changed over time. And over the last 1400 years, certain schools of jurisprudence have become well known, right? And there are effectively one Shia school, and there are 4 Sunni schools. The main ones is the Hanafi school, the Maliki school, the Shafi school, and the Hanbali school. Islamic Finance actually, today in the Middle East, they're following the Hanafi school, and in the Far East they're following mainly the Maliki school. There is some differences between the way they interpret Islamic Finance in the Middle East as well as vis-a-vis the Far East, but that is over time we're getting a consensus, as I said, ijma among the scholars. So this is a very quick, introduction. So you can ask me questions later. Okay, but the way the Islamic finance industry has developed, and I say there is a need to create consensus among the scholars and the industry leaders. Is that we have regulations, right, which governs Islamic finance in especially countries like Bahrain or in the Middle East, Malaysia. They have developed specific regulations for the application of Islamic finance. We have industry bodies which are trying to standardize the interpretation of Sharia to particular Islamic transactions. Most important of those is the OISC, the IOF, the IFB, and the IFM. And in 1975, way back in 1975, they also set up a bank called Islamic Development Bank, and the idea of the Islamic Development Bank was really to bring the whole industry and to develop that industry further. One important thing is you asked, how do they interpret, how do they make sure that Islamic banks or Islamic products are compliant with the Sharia principles? And the way they do that for every bank is that every Islamic bank needs to have a Sharia supervisory body, and like 3 scholars or 4 scholars will sit on the board of each Islamic bank to make sure the Islamic banks, when they claim to have Islamic products, actually are Islamic products. Any questions so far on that? Or we'll ask question later. Okay. So what are the main principles that apply? Okay, or the Sharia principles that apply to Islamic products? First of all, and I think most of you are Muslims will be aware of the fact that interest is prohibited. What is interest? In the Quran, the word that is used is riba. Riba means to increase. Okay. And the way and why it is been prohibited is that you can't increase. If you have a debt, you cannot ask the debt to be postponed and increase the amount of that debt. Okay, so if somebody has borrowed £100, and you say, okay, you give me back in 2 months' time if you can't pay me today, but you pay me £200 in a month's time. That's the increase. That's what is known as riba. I've got actually a lot on the actual the wordings in the Holy Quran, the prohibitions in the Holy Quran, but they're quite lengthy. The only thing I need to tell you is that riba was, the prohibition on riba came gradually. And in the end, there was a very strong statement about prohibition of riba. And in fact, God declared war on those who took riba, who gave riba, and the Holy Prophet ﷺ is said to have, he has said that if anybody takes riba, or gives riba, or writes it down, they will find themselves in hell. Now there are two types of riba, very quickly. One is the riba that I just referred to, where there is an increase, but then obviously people were trying to find ways of circumventing that, what was forbidden. And that circumvention was also prohibited by the Holy Prophet ﷺ. Okay. And that's called riba al-fadl. This is called riba al-nisa, and the other one is called riba al-fadl. But there's a lot of obviously rules and regulations regarding that. What actually is riba al-fadl? It's basically, I will give you an example. Right? Instead of lending money, somebody will say, okay, give me 1 ounce of gold. Right? In a month's time, if you can't pay me back, if you can't return that 1 ounce of gold, you give me 2 ounces of gold. So they're trying to say, okay, without talking about money, they were actually transacting in gold, but different quantities of gold. And the Holy Prophet ﷺ, he forbade that by saying that if you want to transact in gold, it has to be on the same day between the parties. You can't just defer the payment in gold over at a later date, because that resulted in the same kind of increasing of the amount of debt that is due. The other main prohibitions, right, is, and everybody knows about riba, but there is other things like speculation, uncertainty. Gharar is uncertainty in any transaction, which is forbidden. Okay, there you can't engage in speculative behavior, gambling with others. Then the haram activities, anything which is forbidden in the Holy Quran, like taking or consumption of alcohol or eating pork, etc., that's haram. So that is all forbidden. Okay. And more important is that wealth has to be you have to pay a tax on the wealth that you have. Other areas which on Islamic principle goes into honesty and fair trade, full disclosure, avoiding misrepresentation. You can't sell or try to get try to buy something which another party is already trying to conclude. So if two parties are already concluding a transaction, you can't go in and emphatically consume that transaction, like happens when the house price is going up here. Okay. Hoarding is forbidden, as well as the sale of goods in assets in the open market, avoiding taking advantage of sellers' helplessness. So that's also forbidden. Generally, Islam requires that when you enter into your commercial transaction, you apply integrity, sincerity, righteousness, and piety. So what actually happens? The most important thing is all these prohibitions, what do they result in? Okay, they result in, first of all, Islamic finance is based what we call asset-backed transactions. You can't transact just in money. As I said, you can't just lend money to somebody and ask for an increase on that money. The reason is money itself is not considered to have any intrinsic value. It is only a medium of exchange. And for that reason, interest or the compounding of money or taking extra amount on just money itself is forbidden. Okay? That requires then that you have to actually enter into proper trade. God says in the Holy Quran that trade is allowed, whereas riba is forbidden. Investors have to share risk, okay, among themselves. They have to actually earn that any gains from a transaction through taking a risk in that transaction. Okay. And as I said, the haram activities are forbidden. And then on any gains that you have or any wealth you have to pay a certain amount of tax. That's called zakat. As I said, this is a very quick run through. Am I done time or?
You have 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay. There are two types of contracts in Islam. One is a normal contract where you have an agreement between parties. Another contract which is used quite a lot in Islamic finance is a promise. A promise is a unilateral, okay, pledge to do something, but it is not where two parties have agreed to do something together. Because if two parties agree, then it becomes a contract. Okay? Whereas a promise is, I will promise to do something. That is something that is also used in Islamic finance quite a lot. What's the difference between an Islamic bank and conventional bank? Okay, in a conventional model, okay, you have depositors who put money into a conventional bank. Okay. And the conventional bank can loan that money to other borrowers. They receive interest and they pay back interest to the depositors. That's a conventional model. And the Islamic model is the investors become shareholders, or they actually invest the money with an Islamic bank, who then invest that money and with other parties, okay, with their customers. They receive a share of profit and they distribute a share of profit back to the investors. So it's a totally different model of operation than conventional institutions. So any Islamic banks, like the Islamic Bank of Britain, the UK, the whole model, if you look at their saving account and read the terms of the saving account, is quite different from a saving account that you will get from a traditional bank. In there you will say, they will tell you that you are actually taking risk, the money will be invested, and you will get a share of that, of the profit that the bank has made. So an Islamic bank cannot say to you, I'm definitely going to give you 2% over 1 year. They will say, we give you an indication that we may be able to give you 2% over a year, but that's only an indication. If our profit is negative, you will share the loss. If our profit is only 1%, you will get that 1%. If our profit is 5%, you will get that 5%. So there is a totally different model, right, of Islamic bank compared to the conventional banks. Just to give you some verses of the Quran where interest has been forbidden. But God says, Allah will abolish interest and will cause charity to increase. And Allah loves not anyone who is confirmed disbeliever and an arch sinner. Surely those who believe and do good deeds and observe prayer and pay the zakat shall have their reward from the Lord, and no fear shall come on them, nor shall they grieve. O ye who believe, fear Allah and relinquish what remains of interest if you are believers. But if you do it not, then beware of war from Allah and His Messenger. And if you repent, then you shall have your original sums. Thus you shall not wrong, nor shall you be wronged. And if any debtor be in straitened circumstances, then grant him respite till a time of ease. And that you will meet it as a charity shall be better for you if only you knew. And fear the day when you shall be made to return to Allah. Then shall every soul be paid in full what is that it has earned, and they shall not be wronged. May Allah grant us all the ability to understand God's commandment and to apply his principles in our daily life.
So if I didn't make this 20 minutes, 20 minutes, 20 minutes speech, and then our question answer.
Assalamu alaikum and hi to the non-Muslims. What's the proportion in the room here between Muslims and non-Muslims? So like a reasonable kind of feel for. Don't be shy. Who's a Muslim? Okay, I guess that's the majority. My name's Rohan Shaheen. First of all, thank you to the Ahmadiyya Muslim Students Association for inviting me here today. The last time I was in this building was, I guess, about 20 years ago, and I certainly enjoyed being a student at UCL, and I'm really heartened to see it's now number 4 in the world, so well done, and well done for getting in here. I do seem to remember I had more hair 20 years ago, and you know, time can be very cruel, so the best advice I can give the gentleman in the audience is, you know, hang on to your hair. Make the most of it, right? You can go. My thanks all to Mansoor Saab for rattling through his presentation. Literally the last time I sat through that presentation, it took 2 days. And that was 2 days without water, without food. Mansoor Saab had us on our knees. So you have got to wait lightly. I'm not standing here as an expert in Islamic finance. I'll speak for about 10 minutes. I'll give you my own views on how I think we can end up with a fairer system. I think there's few people here today who would say that the current system in the UK, in the US, is a brilliant system. It's a system that seems to work most of the time, but we can improve it. So I just wanted to suggest a few things that we could do to make the system a bit better. And if you guys violently disagree with me, you can tear me apart on the Q&A. I think, and you know, I'd be interested in Mansoor Saab's view on this today, but frankly, in the world today, there is no financial system which I think is fully compliant with the philosophy and teachings of Islam. And I think the debate on what an ideal financial system under Islam looks like can just go on and on and on. But frankly, life is too short, so I'm not here to lecture you and tell you what the ideal Islamic system would look like. I'm really just here to suggest a pragmatic view on how we can move the current system forward with a few, I think, relatively easy steps that we can implement, and we'll end up in a better place. And what I would say is that the recommendations I'm trying to make, I think, are consistent with the guidelines that Islam gives us. I think, as Mansoor Saab said, Islam in parts can be quite prescriptive about things you have to do, like don't drink. And I think in other parts Islam gives you the flexibility to apply various guidelines. And you use your own judgment and interpretation as to how you think for that particular time those judgments would apply. And I think that's one of the beauties of Islam, is that is why we think it is a religion for all times and for all peoples. Because there are some, you know, pretty clear guidelines as to what you can do. So I think what I would say is Islam is a very pro-business belief system. In my view, Islam is also pro-capitalist. And what I mean by that is Islam believes in the dignity of labor, and it believes that through your hard work and your perseverance, that if you earn profits, then you're quite entitled to those profits. So I think Islam is a very pro-capitalist faith, and I think it's a very pro-business faith. At the same time, I think Islam says that actually, hand in hand, you've got to have fairness, justice, equity. You've got to look after the weakest in society. You can't sleep well in your bed at night when you know your neighbor is suffering. And therefore, I think Islam would always urge us to put in place safeguards within any system that we have that protects everybody's rights and actually keeps the system sustainable so that it doesn't break down, we don't end up in civil war, we don't have to go through that pain. And I think, you know, in the last 6 years, since 2008, we've seen massive upheavals in the financial system. You know, rules that I was, as an economics student at UCL, rules that I was taught to believe about, you know, the US Treasury rate being risk-free and the US could never default. I mean, I tell you, you know, in 2009, in a personal capacity, we were looking at nightmare scenarios in the world that I never thought I would ever look at. And to go to that precipice where literally nothing was moving and the world's financial system was closing, and you could not count on your savings in the bank actually being there the next day, suddenly became amazingly real to all of us. And so I think pre-2009, would people have taken a presentation such as this as seriously as I hope that they would do today? No. I think a lot of things have changed. So I guess I'd like to start by answering the fundamental question: is interest actually forbidden in Islam? And I think Mansoor Saab mentioned something called riba. And in my view, the thing that riba specifically refers to is something called usury, which I think is a very evil instrument indeed. What usury is, it's the practice of charging amazingly high interest rates to people who you know have really no alternative. So I know you need the money, I've got money, I'm going to charge you 500%. And I charge you the 500% knowing full well that I'm setting you up to fail. And this is the important thing. So if I loan you some money and I ask you, well, what are you going to do with it? And I look at the use you're going to put the money to, and I know that you don't stand a chance in hell, pardon the pun, of actually paying me back, then I am setting you up to fail on day one, right? So what I am actually doing is, I am actually saying, I'm going to loan to own. So, you know, if I give you some money and you default on that, I'm going to take everything you've got. In my view, that is absolutely wrong, because what that does, it creates economic slavery. A person stands no chance under that system of ever improving their lot in life. So irrespective of how hard they work, how great their ideas are, the opportunities that they've struggled to get for themselves, a system such as that will always lead to failure, and it will leave people very much with the status quo. And I think this practice was very prevalent at the time of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him. And unfortunately, it's still around today. You know, a lot has been written about Wonga and other lenders like that. And frankly, in my view, it's wrong. And I think usury should be made illegal. It creates slaves out of people. Having said that, would I say that all forms of interest should be forbidden? I'm not so sure. I think usury is clearly wrong. But I think if you were to make loans to people at a moderate interest rate, so you look at the interest rate environment today of 5%, you know, is that wrong? And I would say that where proper evaluation is taking place, so when you look at a business or an idea and you want to invest in that business, and you look at the potential of that business and the profits it could generate into the future, and you say that actually, if I was to loan you an amount of money at 5% or even 10%, and actually based on the business and my belief in your business, my view is that actually this is sustainable because I can see a way that you can pay me back, and you can pay me back the interest, and you will be happy and I will be happy and the world will be a better place as a result of it. Who's the loser in this? You know, who is actually losing in such a system? You know, who is losing when somebody is giving you a loan to finance your house at 5%, so that you have a place to live, that you can call your own, and we can actually, you know, build a better society? When you kind of push this logic onto a lot of Islamic scholars, they say, no, your thinking is wrong because Islam is against a fixed return. You know, and why is Islam against a fixed return? And the logic is that, you know, if you can make money in good times or bad times, so whether the business actually makes money or loses money, you still get your 5% on your loan. That's why it's got to be wrong. I'm not convinced that that is really a sound, you know, logical thing to believe in. And again, I think a lot of things have changed since 2009, and I think if you look at the profit and loss accounts of banks over the last 5 years, you know, who is really willing to believe that banks make a fixed return on their investments. I mean, have you seen the profit and loss accounts of these banks? Have you seen the amounts of money they've had to write off? So if you as a lender make a bad decision, ultimately you can lose your entire capital. And you've seen write-offs on a colossal scale. You've seen the US subprime market where people were lending money to people who clearly couldn't afford to buy their houses and couldn't sustain the loans, and the banks had to write the loans off. So, you know, over the long term, I would be very open to believing that the banks were doing something naughty. If I could see a 20 or 30-year piece of data where I see the banks making supernormal returns, way above what other industries make. But they're not. If you look at the banking system and you look at the long-term returns they're making, it's identical to any other industry. So clearly, I don't think they're doing anything wrong. What do you mean, go? What? 10 minutes. I thought that was Mansoor, sorry.
I didn't understand why you showed me the paper.
The other thing that a lot of Islamic scholars say is that there can't be a tiering of risks in Islam, and what I mean by that is, you know, not everybody has the same risk appetite. You know, some people can afford to take a lot of risks, and some people can't afford to take a lot of risks. And the example I would give you is that, let's say there is a widow who has 4 young children, and she has to invest the little money she has in a really smart way so that it gives her an income. And she can't afford to take a lot of risks. And I contrast that with somebody, let's say they're a billionaire and they've invested in, you know, 100 businesses and they invest 10 million a time. If one of them doesn't work, is it such a big deal? He's not going to lose his house. He probably wouldn't even notice it. It would be a rounding error. So the two of them have very different risk appetites. Now, what if the widow says, I want to invest my life savings as I can't leave them in the bank? Because under Islam, you can't put any money in the bank. You can't earn a deposit rate on your money because it's not being constructively used within society. So she's forced to invest it, so she has to find a business that she believes in, that she can put money into. But she doesn't want to lose the money, so let's say she's investing in a telecom company. She knows nothing about telecoms, and she's putting her money in there. Clearly, because there is a pressure for her to invest, she can make a bad decision and she can lose all of her money. Now, under the interest system, what it means is that it allows a tiering of risk. What it says is that if you don't want to take so much risk, that's fine, but then don't expect to get as much return as somebody who is prepared to take a lot of risk. And so there's a reason that somebody lends money at 5%, and there's a reason that a shareholder who invests in a telecom company makes 100% or 200%. It is because the widow who's putting in her money at 5% is saying, I'll settle for 5%, and that's all you have to pay me, as long as you pay me first. So if the company makes some profits, you pay me first, I'm happy with 5%, whatever the business throws up after that is all yours. That is the current capitalist system, and I think it actually does have some very good features to it, and it has a lot of tiering of risks, and it means that people with different risk appetite and different needs can participate in the capitalist system. And to this date, I still haven't had explained to me under an Islamic system, if our capitalist system in the West is so wrong, how would Islam do it? So this would be an interesting debate in a few minutes. The golden rule, I think, under Islam is that Islam is against excess. Islam always says take the moderate road in life, not just when it comes to finance, but all things. You know, excess is bad. It does, however, say that if we work hard, we can enjoy a comfortable lifestyle, we can enjoy the fruits of our success, provided, of course, we discharge our obligations to the less fortunate in society. If you are a man on an annual salary of 25,000, let's say, and you buy a Bentley costing 150,000, probably on a lease, I think it's pretty unadvisable for a person in that position to be doing that. Whereas, if you earn 10 million a year, of which, let's say you donate 9 million a year to charity, would somebody really begrudge you driving a Bentley? So it's not about absolutes, it's about relatives. I think the biggest problem is that the largest religion in the world today is not Islam, it's not Christianity, it's actually materialism. And it seems that everybody feels that they are, you know, entitled to a few foreign holidays a year, to eat out several times a week, to drink some, you know, several cups of reassuringly expensive coffee. But frankly, when you're living beyond your means, on your own cash, that's one thing. But when you're taking out loans just to sustain a lifestyle way beyond what you can afford, that's blatantly wrong. And you just have to look at the boom in credit in the last 20 years. The maxing out of credit cards. And so much of the money that was spent was on luxuries. It wasn't on necessities. It wasn't for paying for your education. It was sustain a lifestyle that people thought they should be entitled to. And I think that's absolutely wrong. So under an Islamic system, true Islamic system, I would absolutely ban taking out credit for luxuries or stuff that just isn't necessary. And I think you just have to move back to a hard work ethic. You work hard in life. You enjoy the fruits of your hard work at some point in the future when you've made your money. I think Islam is also much more collaboration and partnership in how business is done. So again, I'll give you an example. If you have accepted a loan from somebody and the business hasn't quite gone as you thought it would go, and 12 months down the road, the first interest payment is being asked of you by the bank or your lender, and you say, well, actually, I've got a good reason actually as to how we haven't made the money I said we were going to make, and it's not because I'm a crap businessman. It's because my supplier in China let me down, my wife left me, who knows? It's for one of these reasons. In an Islamic system, we can be more collaborative about this. We can look at the underlying reasons why a business went wrong. And we can ask you, and you ask yourself the question, is this a valid reason? Was it foreseeable? Can we fix this? Can this still be a good business? And if all the answers to that is positive, then I think Islam enjoins upon you an obligation to be collaborative and to restructure the loan and actually to move forward on a fresh footing, rather than having a much more cynical view of the world, which is actually, you missed the payment, I'm going to enforce now, and that's the end of that. Islam also requires capital to be gainfully employed in the economy. So as I said earlier, leaving the vast amounts of money you all have in a bank account on a deposit rate is really not a viable option in Islam. And we see it today, actually. One of the biggest problems that we have in the world today is the fact that actually there is plenty of money, but the money is so risk averse, it's sitting in banks today, and it's not actually being invested in developing businesses and creating employment and creating prosperity. So under an Islamic system, it's very simple. What you do is you don't just put a zero deposit rate there, you actually put a negative deposit rate there, which is called zakat. So for instance, by putting money into a bank, you earn, let's say, -2% on it. It means actually you're being sanctioned for not using your capital in society. So the only thing you can do is then to take the money out and actually put it into a business, and that is pro-business. And actually it's not Islam saying that, it's every central bank in the world today saying that. The spectre of negative interest rates is here today, and that is exactly what people are trying to do to encourage banks to lend and to create prosperity. So you're already seeing it happen. Islam is also, it advocates measures to support sustainability. And what I'm talking about really is measures against speculation, short-termism, certain types of derivatives, shorting of stocks, and of course excessive leverage. I mean, to take out as much money as somebody is prepared to give you today is very attractive, but if you can't pay it back, it's going to end in tears. So anything that you push to excess has to be wrong, it cannot be sustainable. And I think all of these things should be removed from the economy, and the benefits are immense. We can move to a system where, as Gordon Brown said, we won't have boom or bust anymore, we won't have depressions, we won't have bubbles. The truth is that if you take the middle road in life, more often than not, you will have an ecosystem around you which is more sustainable and less extreme. And I think that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming into this important topic to listen to this talk. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the slides, and I'm going to have the slides up, and you can obviously read through them while I'm actually talking. And what I'm going to try and do is try and address some of the issues that, in particular, Shaheen Saab actually mentioned that were sort of challenges for him.
You can leave out for questions.
No. It's okay. That's part of my talk. So don't get so nervous. Okay, these are the basic elements that we're going to be going through. The causes of the economic and financial collapse. So basically, I'm going to give you a hypothesis. You've probably heard from a lot of people, as on the news, continuously telling us, it was because of the subprime market, it was because of this or because of that. But the reality is that nobody is really telling you the truth. And the reason for that is because they're not looking at it from a holistic point of view as to what's really happening. Now, I'm going to try and give you some of those pointers, and it's going to be up to you at the end of the day to decide whether, in fact, what I've said is actually makes some sort of sense to you. And also to sort of think as regards what you hear in the future, as regards particular issues that I'm going to be talking about, whether in fact they come out true in the sense of the fact that it will ring true because you will then hear certain other factors, which will actually verify a lot of things that I've actually said. And there'll be a lot of things in history to which I'm going to actually point to you that if you actually think back, that you will have actually heard, and that will actually sort of confirm, at least from my perspective anyway, my view is that it actually confirms what the hypothesis is that I'm going to be presenting to you. Now, the key thing, I believe, in order to be able to understand this thing, is to understand what is money. Okay? If you don't understand what is money, what's the history of money and how it's formed and what role it actually plays in society, you can't really understand what actually happened. Then we're going to examine the growth of the financial system. Okay? You've always had money lenders, etc., etc. Then the question is, what exactly was the role of the financial system because now we have a financial system, and we need to understand that. Then also the central banking financial system, where you have a central bank which actually controls and regulates things, etc. Then we're going to discuss the impact of interest usury. Now, a lot of people think interest and usury are two different things, because usury is actually illegal, under various jurisdictions, which is an exorbitant rate of interest, but interest isn't. But certainly, from a religious perspective, interest and usury are one and the same. It doesn't matter whether the interest rate is 0.5% or 0.1%. It's still usury. Okay. And then we're going to discuss the Islamic principles, which actually would show you, hopefully, that if they had actually been applicable, then we would not be in this situation. And the future collapse, which is inevitable, in my view, right? How that will come about and what will happen. Okay, so we're going to go through this very, very gradually. So first of all, we'll go through what is the causes of the economic financial collapse, and this is a hypothesis. Essentially, what you have is, what is the economy? What do we think of the economy? The economy is fundamentally meant to be the production and the consumption of goods and services within society. Okay? That's what we think of it as being the economy. That's the real economy, I would sort of say. But I would also say to you that now there is not just a real economy, there's also, as it were, a financial economy, which is actually a virtual economy. And one of the things that people don't realize is that the virtual economy, which is the financial economy, actually exists, and it's actually larger than the real economy. It's actually now, originally it was the tail part of the dog, but now that tail is actually wagging the dog. Okay, so there's a real issue about this, and it's larger than the real economy, and it actually dictates to it, and also the people who actually control it in these trillions and trillions. Have you ever wondered, where are all these trillions, right? Well, the question is a very good question, and we're going to address, we're going to leave that question out in the open afterwards. But essentially, you see now, with this financial economy, they are the people who actually dictate what governments do. Governments really have now become helpless, in my view. They can't actually do anything. And you've got those, multinational corporations, and you've got the spectre of globalization, which essentially has taken it over. And the reason is, how does that happen? And that's because of the multiplication of money and how money is now created. And that's a very, very important issue that you need to understand. How is money created? And what actually is happening to us, not just in Britain, everywhere in the world, in the developed world, the people themselves are losing sovereignty because money and sovereignty go together. Okay, this is something you really need to understand, and I'm going to explain this this issue to you very clearly, so that you understand this. Money and sovereignty go together. When you don't have control of money, you don't have control of your own nation. You don't have control of your own destiny. So that's a very, very important issue. Okay. Oh, I've gone the wrong direction. Sorry. Money. Okay, what is money? Originally, obviously, when man started out, it was all on a barter system. I could do something for you, you could do something for me. I had chickens, you had some wood, we did some changing, etc. But essentially, whatever was most in demand, whatever was scarce, essentially, became the medium of exchange. Okay. But then ultimately, sooner or later, human beings then developed the concept of money. And essentially, it's what I would call a measured medium of transferable value. So, I can transfer it to you, you can transfer it to somebody else, etc. And that's a really important issue as regards to transferability. And the transferability of wealth and the circulation of money is actually one of the most important aspects of actually the creation of wealth. Because the question is, how do we actually create wealth within a society? And that's a very important issue, and that is something that Islam as a religion actually shows you how to do it. Not through interest, which is just creating funny money, okay? And which creates a bubble, as part of the real economy. So in any case, you had various things that were money: tally sticks, clay tablets, metals, gold, silver, etc. These are all things that we all know about. And in the 7th century, you had paper, which was developed as a currency. Okay, so that was the first time when actually paper was used. And now, it's actually electrons on a hard drive. You can have hundreds of millions of dollars being transferred, from here to there. I saw a program where they said Russia lost $150 billion overnight. Literally electrons being transferred from over there to over here. Now, I'll explain to you as to how that actually happens and what that actually means, okay, if we have time. Now, it's also, as I said, money is inextricably linked to sovereign power, okay? In the process of colonization, when countries went and actually colonized another country, the first thing that they did is they said, your currency is no good, you have to use our currency. Okay, we will buy your goods in our currency, so therefore we will set the price. Okay, so even if Ghana, for example, had gold, right? Guess what? You'll be paying for it in British pounds, right? And then we will buy in British pounds, and you people have to pay taxes in British pounds. So when you have to pay taxes, guess what? You need pounds, so you have to sell us your goods in pounds to get our pounds, so that you can then pay us taxes. So one of the main ways of colonization has always been money and sovereignty. They go together, okay? And also, even after the post-colonial period, what you had was, say, when I say post-colonial, when you had, say, before the First World War, when Britain was the superpower in the world, the main currency in the world was sterling, okay? And then as they lost their empire and they lost their dominions, etc., their scope of their currency got less, as a result of which their currency came down. The US dollar after the Second World War took over, and then you had the build-up of the petrodollar. So essentially what that means is originally you had all the world's trade going through the banks in England. After the Second World War, you had all the world's trade go through the banks in the United States. Okay? And then the impact of that as regards interest will come to that. But essentially what happens is that money is then used, whether it's in Britain or whether it's in the United States, is actually used by that economy to build it up. So for example, I remember when I used to work in the US, they used to say, everybody used to say all the time, the US is the engine of the world economy. Well, yes, it was, you could sort of say in a sense, but in a way the world was actually the engine of the US economy, because all of the world trade was being funneled through the US banks. And what with all the world, there was a time, say just 20 years ago, when 90% of the world's trade used to go through the US banks. And now it's something like 60%. And now you have China, and you have Russia. They do their trade in their own currencies. China is internationalizing its currency. In the 1980s, Japan was very, very big, had hundreds of billions of dollars in those days, and they should have actually internationalized their currency. They didn't. But anyway, so the issue of sovereign power, I hope you understand, the reason why America is actually the superpower that it is because it actually has 60% of the world's trade actually going through its banks. It's the petrodollar, which actually is the engine which is actually driving the economy over there. So in any case, what Islam, as it were, believes in fundamentally is that money should be used as the medium of exchange for real property and services. So it's really important to understand it's part of something which is tangible, okay? And interest is not tangible. And anyway, the money, as I said, the last thing is the rich and poor is relative matter, but we don't need to, we all know that. Anyway, so go to the next one. The growth of the financial system. Originally, when you had a country, it would have a treasury, they would collect the taxes, and then they would distribute it or use it, but they had a limited amount, whether it was gold or silver, etc., didn't have any extra. When it ran out, then guess what? The king had to send out people to the lords, etc., to get some more money, so they could send it across, they could spend that as well. Anyway, ultimately with the growth of money, more and more money, then you had intermediaries, you had banking, the concept of banking being there, and also depositors. People deposit something, and then they get back some sort of return on it. And they received and paid out interest. Now, also the banks, especially in the United States, because a lot of this development took place in the United States, was the banks actually issued their own currencies, and they also used to give out interest. So they used to create money. But in any event, obviously that couldn't happen forever, whereby private banks are actually creating money. So then, anyway. Let me just go through this other point before I come to the issue as regards the central banking system. Interest and usury, as I said, anything which is when something is actually lent out to somebody, if there's a demand for more than that amount, even if it's a minute amount, it doesn't really matter. It's actually interest. It's forbidden in the Old Testament and the Quran. Now, in those days, money was not creatable. In the Old Testament, it's actually called extortion. Okay? Interest, usury is called extortion. 2 points to remember is that the lender, there is a difference between trade and interest. The lender in the bank is actually insulated in large measure from the real economy, from what's actually happening in the real economy, where he lends out money and his money is actually secured on some assets. The bank is actually one step removed from the actual real economy, what's actually happening, whether the business is going down or the value of things is going down, is actually insulated. One of the key things to remember is that wherever you have interest, right, you have an inevitable product of it is that the rich will always get richer. And the reason is because if you work on an exponential curve and you have interest payments where money is being paid out in bonds, the more money you have, the further up you are on the E curve, okay? And therefore you will make more and more money. So it just depends on where you are. If you're back down here, there's no point. But if you're up here, right, you're never going to get any poorer. So on an interest-based system, the poor are always going to get poorer. The rich will always get richer, and this is why one of the things that they say is, oh well, the gap between the rich and the poor is getting bigger. Surprise, surprise! It's not going to happen any other way. It's inevitable. Central banking system. Anyway, with the growth of money, you had the rise of the central banking system, whereby the central banks essentially control the other regional banks, and they became the main issue of the currency. Okay, and they create money nowadays. Okay. Not because there's a need for it within the economy, but because of the interest requirements of banks to pay out interest, they actually create money, and they do that to so-called to maintain liquidity. okay, to make the system flow, okay, and they do that by what they say increasing the money supply. Anyway, you know, when I was working in the US in Citibank, I remember I used to read these figures. They used to say, you know, 0.2% increase in the money supply every month, you know, or 0.01% or whatever. But if you worked out over on a yearly basis, it will be 2-3%. So which then means that if you take that on an annual basis, right, where they're increasing money supply on top of money supply on top of money supply, guess what? You get a bubble, okay? And that's what's been happening. And with all that petrodollars and all that other world trade flowing through their banking system, guess what? The amount of that bubble is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And in fact, the financial problem that will come the next time around, when there will be when this bubble will burst, will be far bigger than what's just happened. You know. Yeah. Anyway, so money is growth. The key thing to remember is that the money growth is actually unrelated to the real economy and the real services. And wealth grows exponentially under an interest-based system, right? The rich get richer, etc. And also, one of the reasons why you have the boom and bust cycle is because it is so dislocated, the financial economy and the, what I would call the financial economy and the real economy. It becomes totally dislocated. And when ultimately, when you have an increase in the services, etc., and it gets closer and closer, then all of a sudden, then you get the boom back up, okay? And that's what happens. So that's an explanation as regards the boom and bust cycle. Anyway, my point is that the financial economy essentially dwarfs the real economy. It dictates a lot of the political agenda, a lot of, you know, for example, the creation of the EU. As far as I'm concerned, one of the main reasons why the EU was essentially created was because of the fact you had surplus money of Germany, which essentially, you know, because being being an export nation, was earning a lot of money, needed to spend that money, and therefore it used a lot of these countries like, you know, like Portugal and Spain and all these other countries, so they could actually join them up and then lend them money and then hopefully make some money, you know, profit out of it. And now, obviously, all the chickens are coming home to roost. Right? The reason for the collapse is therefore, okay, the commercial banks and the investment banks, everybody says, oh, well, you know, the commercial banks, essentially, they lend to the real economy. They may actually lend to some businesses or to real assets within a particular economy. But the investment banks actually don't. Okay, the investment banks, they essentially are speculating with their money. Okay, on the derivatives markets, etc. Okay, and that is basically gambling. Now, one of the two things are actually forbidden in Islam. One is interest, and the other one is gambling. Now what you've got is you've actually got gambling within the economic system, and this is why it's all the investment banking portions of every single bank. All these banks that actually fell, it was their investment banks that essentially had speculated their money, okay? And then they lost that money, and because of the fact that the dividing wall, there used to be, as it were, a Chinese wall between the commercial banking and investment banking. In the US, that was called the Glass-Steagall Act. I don't know what it was called over here in Britain, but essentially, you know, those barriers were broken down, you know, during the Thatcher era and during the Reagan era. And then what you had is, you know, as a consequence of the interest-based pressure to be able to earn some money, you know, that's why they lent to the subprime mortgages. You know, why would you lend money to somebody you know you can't pay it back? Isn't it better just to hold on to it, right? I mean, that's just common sense. Everybody knows that. Right? And yet, they did lend to it. Why did they do it? And they had all these subprime mortgages, you know, Fannie Mae and Lehman Brothers, etc. You know, they were dealing with leveraged products. Okay, after the collapse of the real economy, after the collapse of the portion which was the investment banks, you had the real economy was essentially asked to underwrite it and say, well, you know, you have to step into it. Okay, the impact of the interest and the so the interest. Let me just go through. I think what I've said that. Let me just go through further. Sorry. 4 Islamic principles of governance. Now this is important. 4 principles. The first principle is that God, being God, He has a right to tell us what to do. Okay, so that's in the first verse. Says that God actually owns everything, and He's telling you that He has the right. And then the second verse deals with the government. God gives government to people, and they have to exercise that government in a particular way. Number 3 actually deals with the issue about representation, that governments should be represented. And number 4 deals with the fact that when we elect people, that we should elect good people who are actually deserve it. And these are the 4 principles of government which Islamic actually says, right? Representative government, that government is actually, the privilege to rule is a trust, not a right. It's the duty of every government to establish peace and progress for everybody on an impartial basis, and rulers have to be impartial judges dealing with the interests of society as a whole. Now, I've got about 3 or 4 other pages. Okay, so if I can just go through quickly. Okay, the types of economic, now Islam, okay, now essentially there's 4 basic types of systems, you can sort of say. Okay, the first is where every single society is based upon whether the individual has, whether the rights of the individual are preserved or the rights of the collective society. Okay, we have, as I said over there, it says the collective is obviously the communism system, the individual is capitalism, but Islam is actually a link between 2 and 3. Okay, it's a middle way.
We can cover this in the discussion now.
Let me just. Oh.
That's the problem with this talk, this topic is there's so much to talk about, really. I just remind speakers when they're answering the questions to speak into the microphone. So, without further ado, we have somebody who's got a microphone to take around to you all if you have questions, so please feel free to ask them. And please say who you'd like your question addressed to.
Okay, thank you the speakers, they're all really, really great and it was all really useful. My question is basically, it could be answered by anyone in the panel, but maybe specifically to the first speaker. So my question generally is, so the first speaker mentioned that all transactions should be dealt with honesty and fair trade in Sharia, but how reliable are Islamic banks really? Because, for example, there's the Islamic Bank of Britain that was recently been shown to have investments within the Syrian regime and then also investments within Qatari institutions, and the Qatari royal family are shareholders within the bank itself. I mean, and they have like atrocious human rights records with regards to the manual labourers within the country itself. So how reliable are they really?
Thank you very much for that question. I mean, obviously it's a very topical question as to how Islamic banks should apply not only the question about fairness, but about human rights, and whether they should be able to, whether the scholars that sits on the board of those banks, should they actually be taking those into account when they are reviewing the transactions undertaken by those banks. Now, Islamic Bank of Britain has 3 scholars. One of them is one of the most renowned Islamic scholars in this field. That doesn't mean that all 3 scholars will agree on the transactions that they have undertaken. There will be disagreement, but at the end of the day, it is the majority that rules. All the Islamic banks, all the scholars can do with respect to this is to guide the management as to what they believe is the appropriate application of Islamic principles to their transactions. Okay. This is something, to what extent Islamic banks are indulging in transactions which may be harmful to the society, okay, is a matter of medical research that needs to be done. The fact that some Islamic banks have been influenced by political considerations because of the shareholders is something that obviously we have to look at. But just going back to what I started off by saying is that the law, okay, which is set out in Sharia, is unchangeable. The interpretation of the law is done by man, and man can make mistakes. My speaker on the left here, talked about difference between interest and usury. Okay, that's one of the debates that's been going on for a very long time among the Islamic scholars. But I think anybody who has read through some of the detailed analysis of what is riba will realize that even a small amount of interest, as was mentioned by Salih, but not even a small amount of interest actually is now considered by most of the scholars to be riba and therefore banned. Okay. You can't just talk about a system where you have small amount. Islam actually tries to, what is the principles underlying Islamic rules and regulations, is that it tries to cut off anything that could eventually lead to harm. Why is alcohol banned? Because it can lead to harm. So why, if you give somebody a small leeway in charging interest, why ban them from charging higher interest? What is considered to be a reasonable amount of interest? So these are things that go on. So I mean, if you have a particular issue about Islamic Bank of Britain and the way they have invested the funds, you as an investor in Islamic Bank can actually go and question the Islamic Bank, because your contract, if you're a saver, if you have a saving account with the Islamic Bank, then you will have a contract of what is called mudaraba, whereby the bank is acting as your agent to invest the funds. And being an agent, they are answerable to any questions that you might have. So you can go and ask those questions to them. So
my question to anybody in the panel is whether in reality, whether you can really have a true Islamic banking system in the time of Islam that is practiced in Muslim countries today.
Can you repeat the question for the camel, please? Things on.
Can I repeat the question?
No, it's fine. Could you repeat from that, please?
Sure. I think you wanted to ask the question is whether Islamic banking system can really be applied given the Islamic the rules and regulations in Islamic countries. Is that what you want to ask?
Not just the rules and regulations, but the political and the religious situation in those countries, because it's so torn apart now.
An economic system is governed by the political system. If you have countries, I will just give you an example, Bahrain or Malaysia, these countries, the governments there took a view long time back that they wanted to run a parallel system to a conventional banking system. So what they did was they said, okay, we want to start off with an Islamic banking system. How can we implement that system, given the constraints that they already had? And the constraints that Islamic banks face is that, remember, modern Islamic banking only started in the 1960s, okay, and really only took off in the 1970s and 80s. So it's a very young industry. We are trying to actually understand, more and more experts or experienced bankers are coming into this field, more and more economists are coming into this field, more research is being done into this field. Okay, how we can actually apply it. You can't say that today, even an Islamic country has a complete Islamic system. No country in the world today has an Islamic system. Iran might today say that they have an Islamic system, but they don't have. Saudi just ignore the fact that they say that all our banking system is Islamic. In fact, they know it isn't. Okay. So, I mean, the research that has been done shows that about 20% of the Muslim population endorses Islamic principles and want to apply and want to invest in Islamic institutions, or want to only do transactions with Islamic institutions. But another 50% of the Muslims are indifferent, because firstly they don't understand, okay, and secondly they question whether the Islamic banks are truly Islamic. Okay. And then you have the rest who say, no, this is all a sham and we don't want to apply it. So, I mean, governments, if you ask governments to try to implement Islamic banking systems, where some have tried, say Malaysia is trying, Bahrain is trying, UAE is trying, but they're doing it through a gradual process of having parallel systems and learning from those parallel systems how they can expand it to the rest of the economy. So I think this is relevant for us.
I think my question is directed to the third speaker. I'm just trying to understand the difference between contract and usury or interest in Islam. So I'll give you a scenario and I would like just to ask whether it's usury or contract. Suppose, for example, I want to buy a car for 100K. I don't have 100K, so I ask for a loan from the bank. Now the bank is supposed to be Islamic, so this is how like Saudi banks function. They say, okay, we'll buy the car for you, but we'll sell it for you for 200K. So is this contract, is it like trade, selling and buying, or is it more of making funny money and is it like going around the system and its interest?
No, I think you should answer that, because you're more in tune with Islamic banking than I am. No. As I say, I defer to him on this. I know when somebody knows more about something than I do.
No, you're an expert in this as well, but let me give you a very simple example. The products that we have under Islamic banking systems, right, range from pure debt, okay, to equity-based transaction. I don't know whether you understand the difference between that. A debt is where you lend somebody money and you expect that money to be returned to you. Okay. Equity-based systems is where you're investing in a business and you may incur a loss on the amount of money that you have given to them. Okay, so there's two different systems. Islam also recognizes leasing, whereby you have an asset, you can give that asset to another party for use and charge a rent on that asset. When you're talking about the product that you're looking at, is where a bank is, you go to the bank and you say, okay, I want to buy a car. Okay, how can I buy the car? Okay, what is the Islamic product that you can use to allow me to buy that car? Okay, because I don't have the money now, but I will have the resources to be able to repay or buy back the car from you in a course of time. So the banks will say, okay, I can buy the car for you today, but because I've spent time and effort in actually buying the car, okay, there's a cost of me actually spending time to buy the car. In addition, the fact is that I am giving the car to you as a rent. You're going to be charging, you're going to be paying me back, you're going to be paying me the rent. So that's a product that the banks use to be able to buy and give you a car. Then you have an option. The car actually doesn't belong to you, the car belongs to the bank. You have an option at the end to be able to buy the car from the bank for £1 or whatever, or nominal amount. And so that's a product that they use, and that's pure, and that's allowed in the Sharia, because it says that renting or use of an asset, or what we call the usufruct of an asset, is allowable. That's called an ijara transaction. Yes. So you waited for a long time.
Yes. Someone wants to invest savings, right? Okay, now if they go to a capitalist bank, they get interest and they get a return. At the moment it's negative interest, so you're not getting much of a return. Now in an Islamic bank, you're also investing your money and you're getting a return. You're in both cases getting a return. In both cases you may be getting more than you put in. It seems to me that both the interest and what you're saying, the profit and loss, are basically the same, but you're using different names and you're using a slightly different way of doing things. Because in both cases, the person who's giving the money is getting more than what they put in before. And I understood that Islamic idea was that you should not be making a profit or making an interest more than what you put in. Now, the other, of course, the thing is with inflation, you do need to have more coming into you, because if you don't, if inflation is 2%, you're only getting 1%, your standard of living is going down. So it seems to me that, you know, although the names are different, you're using a profit and a loss, and the capitalist banks are using interest, basically it's the same.
Okay, that is one of the main arguments that is raised against Islamic institutions, is that the returns that they're giving to the investors is basically the same as the returns that they would have gotten had they put the money into a conventional institution and got interest. Let me address it this a different way. Okay, if you put the money into a Western or a traditional institution, right? They tell you straight away, okay, you will be earning for the next 6 months 2%. Correct? Okay. If you put your money into an Islamic institution, the contract that you sign with an Islamic institution is totally different. It is what we call an agency arrangement. They take your money and they say, we will invest the funds for you, but there is no guarantee that we will be able to earn that 2% for you. They can give you an indication that on the way we have, the way in which we are actually utilizing those funds that you've given us. Okay, we are investing those funds on your behalf, and if the returns that comes to us, right, we can give you an indication that of all the assets that we are investing the funds in, right, or the pool of assets that we invest in the funds in, right, we'll be able to earn 2%, and we'll be able to give you that. If we are unable to earn that 2%, we will not give you that 2%. So there is a difference, right, in the way the funds are managed, okay, and who's accountable for those funds. And there's a difference in contracts that are used for example. It has happened in the Middle East, where people have put money into some institutions with the indication that they might get 10%. In fact, what they found is that they get a letter saying, sorry, we put the money into an investment. Okay, that investment has gone bad because of economic conditions which we were unable to foresee, and you have actually incurred a loss. Okay, rather than getting the money. Now, what's the difference between a conventional bank and an Islamic bank? Here, the conventional bank, right, is being forced to pay you that return regardless of whether they have made a loss on that investment or not. An Islamic bank, right, will probably look at the circumstances, look at the investors, see whether, if the management have been very careful, they've done all the due diligence, they have invested the fund with a party, right? But of course, because of circumstances, because of unforeseen circumstances, the transaction has gone bad, they will go to the investor and say, okay, under Islam, you're supposed to forgive somebody who's unable to repay you. Okay, so if the Islamic bank then writes off that debt,
yeah, that's the operation of the bank. What I was talking about, the end result there.
Yes.
That's the operation of the bank. That's the end. I want to talk about
Yeah.
end result. The end result is that you get more of your money at the end, i.e. by interest or by the profit of the bank. And I understood Islam finance that you shouldn't be getting more. You should not. It's not just usually. You're saying interest that totally is wrong. Not just usually.
Yeah, but you see, when you give your money to the bank, right, you're not lending the money to the bank. You're investing the funds to the bank. Like you will invest the money by putting your money into, let's say, an IBM shares, or you invest your shares by buying a share in a project. Okay. You're not lending the money to them. You're actually investing, and that investment, if it goes bad, if they don't give you dividends, you're not going to get a return. Islamic banks are giving you virtually like a dividend on the money that you invested.
Okay. I think one of the things that we need to recognize is that all these countries that so-called have Islamic... I think we need to recognize is that in all these countries that so-called have Islamic banking, they're essentially conducting this so-called Islamic banking within a Western-style interest-based banking system. So in other words, they still have the interest-based system within their economy. They're still creating money on the basis of interest, because money has to be created in order to service those interest-bearing accounts. So they're creating money for that purpose. So it's really a case of these companies where, you know, they so-called do these Islamic banking, and they do these, as it was a special, you know, mudaraba and all these special products on that type of basis. But in a real Islamic system, you wouldn't have money being created for the interest-based system. What you would have is, you would have banks, because what are banks really meant to be doing? Banks are meant to be taking in money from the depositors, from society, and then essentially investing it into real products. So into real companies, like for example, they would be, you know, in an Islamic system, in my view, they would actually be investing into the likes of Vodafone and, you know, BT, etc., etc. So instead of those companies, when they need money, going out and actually borrowing money on, you know, on the bond market or whatever else, right? They don't do that. They actually, the banks actually funnel it into those companies, and then they actually monitor those companies to see how well they're doing. So for example, if you had an Islamic-based system and the banks were essentially acting as collectors of money, of society, and putting it into, for example, the stock market, now we know that over the long term, the stock market always makes a lot more money than the banks. You know, if you've actually had your money in the stock market over the last 50 years and had your money in the bank, you know, it would be vastly superior. And that's what Islam says. Islam says money should be made as a result of real risk and real business. Not as a, you know, money shouldn't be created just as a plaything. This is why you know, the bankers, for example, you know, you know, these people who are a banker, they get these multi-million-dollar payouts, because in a way it's like funny money. It's just money made on money on money made on money, whereas there is no real growth in the economy which matches the increase in the money supply. And that is the reason why you actually have inflation. Everybody knows that if you didn't actually have an interest-based system, you wouldn't actually have inflation. And it's inflation that actually kills and makes the poor poorer. Okay? Because at the end of the day, he never recovers. Even if he's got, if the bank is paying him 2%, guess what? The inflation rate is 3%, right? If the bank is paying him 3%, guess what? The inflation rate is 4%. So he's always losing. So this is the key thing. Islam doesn't believe in this notion that you're always continuously, you know, the capital value of goods is growing up exponentially. And this is why, as I said, if you're on the exponential curve, the further up you are, the more richer and richer you get. And this is one of the reasons why they say, you know, if you have, you know, £1 million, it's easier to make the next million. And if you've got £10 million, guess what? It's even easier to make the next £10 million, right? Because you're further up on that curve.
Sorry, can I just interject? I want to make 3 points. The first point is that I think the Muslim world today is in a lot of trouble. So, you know, Islam as a religion means peace. And as a Muslim, your objectives in life are really just twofold. In the simplest sense, it is to worship Allah and it is to serve humanity. And when you look at just about every Muslim country on this planet, is either in civil war or on the brink of civil war. Peaceful coexistence has gone out of the window. Muslim between Muslim, Muslim between Christian. And so I would question the integrity and validity of any system. Call it Islamic or call it whatever you want, that is emanating from that ecosystem. That's the first point I'd like to make. The second point is that the debate here is not around usury. All of us are agreed that usury is wrong. The debate is really around whether we think interest rates at non-usurious levels is wrong. And I think the Muslim world has been trying to find a solution to this for years and years and years. And the best that the Muslim world has done is to give you a sukuk market, which is identical to the bond market, which charges interest rates which are identical to the basis point, to a commercial interest rate. The best the Muslim world has done today is to give you a mortgage, which, surprise, surprise, is exactly the same rate as the rate you would put in mortgage TSB. So don't talk to me really about the Muslim world and Islamic. It's morally corrupt, it's bankrupt, and it's playing with words. That's the reality. I just want to put three thoughts in your, leave you with three thoughts, which is that if you force everybody, if you remove interest and you force people down to becoming just equity investors, there are people on this planet who can afford to be equity investors because they can afford to take the hit. But 9 out of 10 businesses fail. There is a ton of people who cannot afford to take that risk, and so Islam has to come up with a solution for those people, and the Muslim world has not done that. The second point I'd like to make is that somebody says, interest at 0.5%. Wow, you're saying that the interest system is designed to make the rich get richer. Well, as a businessman, I'll take interest at 0.5% any day of the week, compared to giving out 20% of my company to somebody. So who's being taken advantage of?
Doesn't matter.
Me or them? And you say that actually the interest system makes the rich richer. You've just got to look at the write-offs that the banks are taking for bad lending. You know, if I'm a banker and I lend money, and I have to pay the price for that, I lose my shirt. You seem to think that actually, if I make a bad lending decision, it's just play money. It's real money. These are real balance sheets. These are real deposit accounts that are taking a hit.
Okay, you're talking about commercial banks, or you're talking about investment banks?
Commercial banks.
Essentially, now there is no differentiation, because the investment banks is where they lose the money, and the commercial banks, or the commercial portion, and the commercial depositors are the ones that are actually losing their deposits. Okay, and that's the reality of it. Okay, the commercial banks have never really gone out of business, because most of their lending is actually secured. You know, when you go and buy your house, okay, guess what? They have a charge on your house. If you want to borrow money for your businesses, guess what? They will have a charge in your business. Okay, so in the real investing in the real world, which is what I've said, the commercial lending business, because there was a difference. And as I said, this Chinese wall was essentially taken down during the Reagan and Thatcher eras, and that is one of the key issues, and that's now what is being debated about resurrecting that. Okay, the commercial banks have never lost money. Okay, the building societies otherwise were never going bust. When we were young, okay, you guys are all so young anyway, but I mean, you know, when I was young, okay, they never, you know, did you ever hear of a building society going bust? And the answer is no. You know, you had tiny little building societies because they were secured on real assets, on the real economy, which is a completely different situation. Okay, so that's my perspective.
Question on the back of all of this. Yeah.
Can I just clarify one point? You can see there is a debate going on here, okay, between whether you can charge a reasonable amount of interest, right, or whether you have to implement a fully Islamic system in an Islamic system where all the principles of Sharia are being applied. As I mentioned earlier, right, modern Islamic banking system has only started, about 30, 40 years ago. It's catching up slowly. It's got a long way to go before they can actually come up and develop products and services that can match it, right, the conventional model, and can also provide a good return to everybody. Now, along the way, banks have made mistakes. Not only Islamic banks, but the conventional banks, everybody has made mistakes. Okay? But one thing I want to tell you, that there is a prophecy in the Holy Quran, and God says it very clearly. He says, Allah will abolish interest and will cause charity to increase. So there's a prophecy that at the end of the day, Islamic systems, they have started off again, okay, will one day be prominent and dominant in the world.
Okay, I don't disagree with that, but my friend, what I would like to say to all of you is that nothing works in a vacuum, okay? We're talking about Islamic banking within a Western-style system, okay? But in fact, you have to look at even the bigger picture than that. You have to look at it within the context of the legal system, okay? The social system, all of the other systems. For example, one of the reasons why you have all this problem with surplus money and the super rich getting richer and richer and richer is because of the concentration of wealth, which the system, the economic system, actually allows. It allows people to become super wealthy. And Islam actually has a system whereby people, it encourages free enterprise so people can get money and become rich. But there is a way to claw some of that money back. It is through a certain taxation system. One second. And it's through capital taxation. One of the things that Western society does is it actually kills personal incentive to actually work, right? Because Islam actually says that man shall live by what he earns, okay? So at the end of the day, human beings should be earning their living by what they earn. In other words, they should get the benefit of what they actually earn. But other than that, they're not entitled to get, they're not entitled to, for example, keep all that money continuously as capital and allow their capital to grow. And this is why in Islam you have capital taxation. There's various other means of inheritance, for example, the inheritance laws whereby money is actually distributed to as many people as possible. In the Western society, one of the reasons why you had, for example, You had the French Revolution that came about, which was the landlords, etc., and in Russia, and even in England to some extent, is because you had certain rules of inheritance. The primogeniture rule, which says that the firstborn essentially inherited the entire estate. For example, we know, for example, with regard to Diana, Princess Diana, her brother, actually inherited everything. She inherited virtually nothing. Okay, and one of those that system is essentially geared towards the concentration of wealth, whereas Islam essentially says that wealth should be distributed throughout society, so that then money can actually circulate. Okay, and circulation of wealth is actually what creates wealth. Okay, because it actually goes from person to person to person.
I think you need to leave.
Sorry.
I need 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Should we end in 10-15 minutes?
Yeah. This is somebody else. Want to ask a question at the back. Yeah. At the back.
Oh, there was
sorry.
And then, sure.
Apologies for that. I have a quick question for the last speaker, and going back to Hans' last point as well about investment banks and losing money in this recent crisis. If you go back to what you were saying earlier about what money actually is, at the beginning it was, as a receipt for your deposit of wealth, which could have been, whatever you deposit in the bank, which is actual wealth, and that was seen as a receipt. So I give the bearer a promise to pay £5 of equivalent. So one question actually is that when banks start to print money, and which is not deposited by actual depositors, does that money actually exist in the real economy?
No, the banks don't do it now.
As I know, but when it was done back...
well, that's a long time ago. I mean, exactly what the mechanism was, but we do know that there were various banks, the Wells Fargo Bank and various other banks that used to issue their own notes.
Yeah.
Okay. Exactly how exactly the system worked then, I'm not quite sure. But I know now, the money is increased by means of increasing the money supply continuously, and the amount of money which is actually printed now is just a fraction. It's maybe 1-2% of the actual amount which is actually in circulation.
Yeah, well, we see that today as well.
I'm not sure what your question is.
With the quantitative easing, so if you actually print vast amounts of money, does that actually hold any tangible value, because it's not actually backed up against with work that's done?
No, at the end of the day, it doesn't have to be backed up by anything. You see, and governments will actually print money, and that's why ultimately you get hyperinflation.
So yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. So how can that hold any true value? If it's
no, it does hold true value. You see, the difference is, if, for example, the government was actually printing this money and was then actually spending it within society, so in other words, it wasn't actually paying it out to the various institutions as interest, right? And therefore just not going into the real economy, right? Then it would actually generate more wealth. Okay, it would, people would set up more factories, more businesses, etc., would be using it to employ more and more people. So what I'm saying to you is that one of the key things in Islam is that it must be based upon the real economy, which is not speculative. So everything which is speculative is essentially within the larger definition of riba, because basically it is gambling anyway. Okay. And as I said to you, the real problem is that now within the economy, which is actually acceptable now, is the aspect of gambling. Sorry, at the back, I believe there's that gentleman over there. Over there on the left.
So I'd just like to address the whole panel, just wondering how the role of Islamic banks charge, because you mentioned how there are products that it obviously differs from a Western commercial bank, where savings are in currency, whereas Islamic banks' savings are kind of denoted in financial products. So I was wondering, in incentives, it seems to me more like a portfolio manager in some sense. It resembles more of that. I just want to see what's the incentive for an Islamic bank in terms of that concept.
What's the incentive for an Islamic bank to conduct Islamic banking?
So for example, in Western commercial banks, how they charge, for example, people want to save their money, and it's through loans, and the difference is... Well,
in a normal bank, what normally happens is that the bank essentially, people who own the bank they have a certain amount of share capital, so many millions or tens of millions of pounds, and that's their share capital they put into the company, which is called the bank, right? Then what they do is they go out to the society and they set up a shop, as it were, and invite people to actually deposit their money, and then they take that money and then they lend it out. That's essentially in the commercial banking. They lend it out to the businesses, to the people who want to buy a house or buy a car or lease things, etc., etc. Okay, and then whatever money they actually make from lending it out on an interest-based system, right? Whatever money they make, they keep a certain percentage, and then they promise, obviously, to give you, they give you whatever they're promised to give you, because their margin is such that on their businesses, if they're earning 7%, they'll be giving you 3% or 4%. Whatever is that extra margin is their actual cost. And then what happens is that money then goes to the shareholders. Okay, so it's just like every other company, they pay their shareholders.
In an Islamic system, the difference here is that you talked about portfolio management, is basically, you're quite right in that respect. Okay, is in the Islamic system, the contract that they write, the Islamic banks write for saving accounts, is profit sharing. So the banks will say that we will take 40% of the profit that is earned, and that is our share. Your share is 60%. Okay, so they might say, okay, that if you keep your money with us for a longer period, we will reduce our share to 20% and we give you 80%. So it is a profit sharing arrangement, not an arrangement where they will say we give you a fixed rate of return regardless of what we are making. So if you're making a huge amount of money, you're only going to get the 2%. If you're making 20%, you're only going to get 2%. Okay. Whereas in an Islamic bank, if they're making 20%, they're going to give you 40% of that 20% which they have earned. That's the difference.
I would say that there was a bank in the UK I was involved with setting up called Metro Bank, and you have to ask yourself what is the actual function of a bank, and it is for a lot of people it's just somewhere to keep their money safe. And so Metro Bank says that actually we're not going to pay you anything on your deposit accounts, we're just going to charge you to keep your money in the bank and actually keep it safe. So in some senses an Islamic bank could perform that function, just in terms of keeping your money safe. But I agree with you. I think if you look at all the Islamic banks today, Mansoor would agree, they're built on a Western model, and so they're almost indistinguishable from conventional banks. Where I do have an issue is that if you take a certain interpretation of Islamic philosophy, then the only risk under Islam you're really allowed to take is pure equity risk. And my point, which I've been trying to make, is that pure equity risk is not for everybody. There is a halfway house somewhere, which can be consistent with Islam and can lead to equity and fairness. Because that's what we're all after. We're after a system which is fundamentally fair and sustainable. But I think it's very difficult because you have a universal Sharia scholar, and it's like turkeys voting for Christmas. It's going to be very difficult for a Sharia scholar to say, oh yeah, I think interest is okay.
On the back of that question, if I could, does anybody else have any other? Okay, there's a question there. Can I just ask? I think we're going to have to call it a day in 2-3 minutes, actually. So maybe if you can make that a quick question. But I just want to ask one thing myself, actually. So there's been this issue flagged up between, other than pure equity risk, what other types of risk would be permitted under Islamic banking, whereby, for example, the widow could put her money in the bank safely. Would it just, I would like to address this to one of you two, or both of you, because this is the question posed by you, and I think this is the key issue, really. What other form of risk could be, what other form of structure could there be for that widow to put her money in the bank safely without having to deal with having to lose 40% of it, or whatever?
Which one do you? Okay.
Other than the metro system, you also...
okay, this so-called risk-free thing, Islam does not believe in this notion of risk-free, okay? The way it becomes risk-free, I'll tell you, and that's addressing his point directly. Islam doesn't say that the widow who's actually investing her money, she's just investing in one company, okay? You're pulling things together, and as we all know, for example, if you're a stock market investor, what you do is you actually examine the companies. There's a portfolio of companies that you invest in. And so therefore, the old lady, when she's putting her money in, it's not dependent upon one company going down the tube, okay? Or the entire economy is not going to go down the tubes. okay? The entire economy as a whole, if it's growing, and it's a real economy, and there is no actual inflation, etc., and the rest of the other principles of Islam are actually being applied, she will not lose her money. Gradually, it will actually increase. It's just like, as I said, even if you just take pure equity investing, if you had put into the FTSE 100 companies, 10 years ago, a certain amount of money and the same amount in the bank, so-called, any kind of bank, okay, you'd make a lot more money on the FTSE, right? So at the end of the day, it seems as though there's a lot of risk for the old lady, right? But in reality, there isn't, because Islam essentially says that there's got to be a way whereby money which has been locked up is actually released. One of the reasons why in third world countries, those countries never progress is because money is in the hands of a very, very few number of people. They actually hold it, they hoard it, and then what they do is they invest it into Western countries, and they don't invest it within their own societies. Okay? And there's no mechanism to get that money and that wealth, whether it's vast estates of land or whether it's businesses, etc. Because nowadays the concept of taxation, for example, is on the basis that you're taxed on income. And we all know the rich don't pay tax. Okay? The rich do not pay tax. The poor do not pay tax. It's the middle classes that pay the taxes. Who are being hit now in this economy? You think it's the poor being hit? Poor aren't really being hit. And they get a few pounds less, on the dole, etc. Right? Are the rich being hit? No. Guess what? All the rich items, the luxury items, there has been a boom in the last few years in the rich luxury item market. Okay? They are swimming in money. Okay? Who is being hit? It's the middle classes. It's the people who are actually on PAYE. Okay? A lot of the business don't even pay taxes, but it's the PAYE, the middle classes, that are actually being hit. Okay? And because they're actually clawing it back, and there's a disincentive for people to actually earn money and to invest their money. Okay? And that's the key thing to remember. You've got to have a mechanism to bring that money back, the money of the super rich. And now that's not being. There are various mechanisms, for example, under income taxation. They have offshore accounts, they have offshore, mechanisms whereby they don't pay. I mean, you look at all these big companies, and all these scandals that are going on nowadays. So everybody